Section 5. Priam too sat silent. There was much to take in. He too knew what it was to lose a son. He had lost so many in these last months and years, all of them dear to him, or so he had told himself. He had stood beside the body of each one and poured wine from the cup and named him to the gods, sent them, each one lighted by smoking torches and accompanied by prayers and the formal wailing of women, down into the underworld. All is custom and the law demands. Fired the brand, set it to the pyre with its load of slaughtered oxen. Surely he of all men knew what it was to lose a son. Okay, this section is talking about how he, up until this point, he's lost so many sons. He knew what it was to lose a son. All of them dear to him, or so he had told himself. So it's actually Somax's description of losing his own sons that highlights to Priam that he actually hasn't experienced a loss like Priam. He hasn't engaged in those relationships in the same, like Somax. He hasn't engaged in those relationships in the way that Somax has. So he hasn't felt the loss in the same way that Somax has. And what he's talking about here is not the actual grief that he felt, but the process and the tradition that surrounds those deaths. So he's talking about the expectations and the ceremony of death, the performative kind of aspect of it, not the aspect of losing an individual son. So he's kind of comparing his own experience of losing his sons as quite a ceremonial, performative sort of ritual to the deep personal loss that Somax feels. But when he considered the terms in which his companion had spoken, the lively manner, so full of emotion, in which he had called the boy up at the very moment of his raising the cart on the strong arch of his back, that cry, of a kind he had never heard before or since, when something broke in his innards, his singing as he washed out in the yard on his way to the girls, all that was so personal, and the man's memory of it so present and raw, even now in the telling of it, that Priam wondered if the phrase he had taken up so easily, that he knew what it was to lose a son, really did mean the same for him as it did for the driver. Whether what he had felt for the loss of Gorgothian, whose mother, the lovely Castianira, had come all the way from Asme to marry him, and Doricles and Isis and Troilus and the rest, was in any way comparable to what this man had felt for a boy who was, after all, neither a prince nor a warrior, just a villager like so many more. Alright, so Priam wondered if the phrase he had taken up so easily, that he knew what it was to lose a son, really meant the same for him as it did for the driver. So here Priam is starting to realise that different people's experiences in different walks of life influence how they interact with everything. So Priam's saying, like, of course I know what it is to lose a son, I've lost so many of them. But now he's realising that his experience is so different to Somax's, that how could he really know what it's like to lose a son when it differs so vastly from what Somax has experienced. And he's saying, even though I've lost these people who have titles and they have importance in the world, how can I say that I've lost a son? How is this in any way comparable to what this man had felt for a boy who was neither a prince nor a warrior? He was just a villager. But what he's talking about here is this idea that Priam keeps coming back to of the importance of humanity and just being a man and just existing. That is equally... Well, he's starting to realise that it's just as important to have that human experience as it is to be performative and to be a leader and to be important. All right. The truth was that none of his sons was in that sense particular. Their relationship to him was formal and symbolic, part of that dreamlike play before the gods and in the world's eye that is both the splendour and the ordeal of kingship. He could not even be sure of their actual number. 50, they said, but that was only a manner of speaking. A good round number. A bid, a powerful one for the world's regard. An aggressive purchase on the future. Clear evidence of a godlike activity in the sphere of breeding and begetting. Another aspect of the necessary show. Like the list of his allies, or the measures of gold and the suits of embossed and finely worked armour, the cauldrons and tripods and precious cups that made up his fabled treasury. The actual number he could not swear to. 2 or 3 more than 50? 2 or 3 less? Alright. So, their relationship to him was formal and symbolic. So again, this is showing how Priam lives in a world that is formal and symbolic and representational. So even his relationships with his own children are symbolic. It's both the splendor and the ordeal of kingship. Okay, so it's a dreamlike play. It's not real. It's a dreamlike play. So first of all, dreamlike, but then also play. It's performative. So this is something that's unreal. It's performed. And that is what both makes kingship, the splendor of it, the drama of it, but it's also the ordeal, the limitation of it, and that's what stops him from engaging with the world as a human. And he says he could not even be sure of the actual number, and then he's talking about, 2 or 3 more than 50, 2 or 3 less. It's kind of implying, like, how could he say that he knows what it is to lose a son when he doesn't even know how many kids he's got? He's clearly not that attached to them. He's attached to the symbolic idea of them, and the idea, like, the power, the world's regard, an aggressive purchase on the future. So basically he's saying, like, these children are my legacy. They are the way that I know that once I'm dead, I will continue to maintain the power that I have and my role as king. But he actually doesn't have any connection to them. So he calls them another aspect of the necessary show, like his list of allies or measures of gold, or basically he's comparing them to possessions or to alliances, not to anything that he feels strongly about or emotional about. It's his children for him represent the continuation of his power, and honestly not a whole lot more than that. Alright, passage 6. Perhaps, but hadn't he been saved something as well? When the years arrived in which, one after the other, his sons were brought in from the battlefield, and he had 20 times over to stand by a corpse and pour out wine, and give the pierced and bloodless or hacked body a name, wouldn't he have suffered 20 times over if, as he held the brand to the pyre, he had had to remember how this one sweat when he crowned him once after a wrestling match, had had an odour of the stable as rank as any groom's, and how that one had had a little spinning top, and had fallen once when he went stumbling after it on the palace floor, and had recognised, with an unexpected onrush of recall, the star-shaped scar that was still visible on the young man's cheek, just inches from where a Greek javelin had shattered the jaw, smashed the teeth, and taken a piece the size of his fist out the back of his skull. Even the ghostly reflection now of what he had never, in fact, allowed himself to see made his old heart leap and flutter. Alright, so he is talking about how, he didn't have the same relationship with his sons as Somax did, but hasn't that protected him? Wouldn't it have broken him if he had to go through what Somax went through 20 times? Because of the roles that his sons played, they were expected to go to war and to fight for their kingdom, and because of that, how would he have survived if he'd known all of these things about his sons? However, it's really interesting that he says the ghostly recollection now of what he had never in fact allowed himself to see made his old heart leap and flutter. So really what he's saying, he doesn't want to admit it to himself, but he does remember these things. He remembers these little descriptions that he's got about his sons. These might be things that he's seen in passing, but even these little glimpses, this ghostly recollection. So whether these are memories of things that he's kind of seen and not really allowed himself to participate in, or if these are purely fabricated out of his mind, this has made his old heart leap and flutter. So this has touched him emotionally in a way that he hasn't ever really been engaged with before. And that's why he's kind of saying, if I had allowed myself to love my sons the way that Somax did, I wouldn't have survived. I would have had to do that 20 times over, because they've all died in service to their kingdom. Royal custom, the habit of averting his gaze always from the unnecessary and particular, had saved him from all that. And yet it was just such unnecessary things in the old man's talk, occasions in which pain and pleasure were inextricably mixed, that so engaged and moved him. Alright, so again he's talking about how the royal custom, averting his gaze from the unnecessary and particular. So again, how the role of the king is not to be sort of bogged down in the day-to-day happenings, but to engage in the ceremonial sort of duties of life. But he's saying it's just these unnecessary things that Somax is talking about that had engaged and moved him. So he hasn't been engaged and moved by his own experiences of life because it has been symbolic and representational. Whereas what Somax is saying actually makes him respond in a human way. So again, we've got a contrast between the symbolic life of a king and the real engaging human life of Somax.